the man of the hour, we have Cory Graham. Cory, how you doing tonight?
Good. I was just texting my builder to make sure he stocks up on nails over the next couple of months if there's going to be a shortage coming into the summer. So I appreciate that.
Yes. Yeah. The shortage supply issue and the supply chain stuff it looks to be a big problem that a lot of builders are facing. But, that's for another day to solve those problems. Today, we're talking about, investing out of province, and you're spread out. You got a couple spots, and like Batman, just give us a little bit of a intro to yourself and tell us a little bit about what you've done so far in the real estate investment game.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. So I am from Vancouver originally. I'm here in North Vancouver right now. I originally got my start in real estate, I guess, going right back to it was when I finished my master's degree as a physiotherapist. I came back home, was bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, starting your career. And what do you do when you start your career? You're supposed to find a place to live, buy a house. So at the time, I was very fresh. All I really knew was having my nose in books, learning about physio. I found a family friend's mom who was a realtor, went looking for properties or looking for essentially as small as I could find, being, relatively new out of a long time in school with debt, and landed in a condominium in Langley. I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. I had my friend's mom as my realtor, showing me through, handing me a stack of paper this big, being like, sign this, sign this, sign this, go to this lawyer, do this, put this money here. It was a very overwhelming experience. At that point, I ended up, I get that condo in Langley. At that point, I was like, oh man, real estate, like, whew, I don't know if this is for me. Like that was really stressful. So then I started my career working as a physiotherapist. A year goes by and I get my property assessment for my Langley condo. And I look at it and compared it to the year before and looked on to what they were selling it now and realized that my condo had made more than I had made as a physiotherapist that year. And at that point I kind of stopped. I was like, oh, maybe I should look at this real estate thing again. And then from there, I had someone give me some different things to look at. I ended up looking through, just going right down the rabbit hole of learning, reading, ended up landing from Vancouver. I essentially started looking, okay, what can I make as a rental property work? Started in Vancouver proper, grew up here. I know the area. For what I was looking to do, the plans didn't work. And so I kept kind of like concentric rings. I started looking outwards from Vancouver and I was like, okay, now we'll try into the Tri-Cities. And I was like, those numbers, I couldn't really afford any of that kind of stuff. Went even farther into, Mission area, then decided to go even farther into the Kamloops Kelowna area. And then I think I was at maybe a rain event or I forget what event it was, but I remember seeing James speak. And it had never even occurred to me to consider anything other than around Vancouver. And then it was just like, well, if I'm going to be driving for 5 hours to go to Kelowna, what's the difference of, hopping on a plane and jumping over some Rocky Mountains and heading to a different province? And then from there, I ended up taking a leap of faith with one of your guys' trusted mortgage brokers who I have ended up partnering with, came onto a bus tour to take a look at some properties in Edmonton. And then from there, it was all bets were off and it was off to the races. Many hiccups along the way, a couple that if we want to get into, we can. But through a lot of trial and error and kind of learn by fire, ended up closing on, I think I have 5 properties now in Edmonton, and I also have another one in Hamilton in Ontario, and my condo here. And we're looking to just kind of full steam ahead as long as I can make numbers work now that I'm comfortable investing in a place where I'm not geographically located.
That's awesome. Well, that's a crazy story, and I love the fact that you looked at your tax assessment or your assessment came in and you're like, holy shit, this is a lot. This is more than my T4. Like, what happened there? So that was the spark that got you going for investing.
It was like, I always tell people, I kind of fell backwards into it. I didn't really At first I was like, I can't, like, I signed so much stuff. I paid the lawyer how much to sign 3 pieces of paper? Like what? Like, this is crazy. Like but yeah, I kind of, and there was no, I would say there's no real skill in getting that condo. I bought in an area, did a lot of things. I bought an area that I needed to because it was close to my work. Did a lot of things that I probably wouldn't recommend now. But I decided once I'd gotten myself educated that I wasn't going to have that being an excuse. I was going to use that as an advantage moving forward. And that's kind of how it kind of sparked that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah,
So let's
stumbled in.
You stumbled in. That's the best way of entering, right? Just roll right into it. So let's talk a little bit about, you mentioned James is obviously a captivating speaker. So he probably drew you in on his presentation with his funny memes and his, things he Googles and finds and throws them up and then talks about them. But you've invested in Edmonton. For you, it sounded like that was a little bit more of a geographical decision. But you've also invested in other markets as well outside of Edmonton, further away from where you live. So tell me about the reason why you kind of looked at that market and now as a more experienced investor, how are you choosing those markets now? What are you looking for? What are the things that are making you choose a market over another?
Sure. So that's a great question. Yeah, really, a lot of what I do now, and one thing that I always harp a lot with people that I chat with is you really have to focus on building that team, building the power team. It's a more US centric book, but there's a book by David Green from Bigger Pockets, the long distance real estate investor, and that talks about, your core four, your power team. And he has all these, these kind of lame, corny cliches, but it's so pivotal. Like, I can't stress that enough, how important it is, especially if you are out of province, to have a team that you trust on the ground and that you have good communication with, that have goals that align. And I've in Edmonton, I've found that, and in Hamilton, where I have my other properties, I have that as well. It is, if the fundamentals of a city, for me, if they make sense, it's about the team. Like a team that you trust, and a team that has experience and knows the investing game. And I pretty much, anybody that I talk to that's interested in Edmonton, that's the first thing I say. I'm like, that's great. Everybody that I have in Edmonton are what make it work for me. It's all them for that, like, essentially. And so I always am engaged. You got to talk to these people, communicate with these people, network with these people. That's really the key. But going back from a fundamentals perspective, like we'd spoken before, I had to look at a few different things at that as well. Did you want to get into that, or?
Yeah, I mean, we'll definitely touch on the power team. I think that's a huge portion, but I'm definitely interested in, so there's always two ways of finding a market. The first way is similar to how you found Edmonton. You wanted to look at something geographical. You're like, okay, the city is close. It's about an hour and a half flight from me. That's actually better than a 5-hour flight to Kelowna. So it sounds like that decision was made more geographically. Mm-hmm. Then you can also make a decision on how to invest via, like, I'm going to find a property that cash flows in this city. And then you're like, I also want to find a city that cash flows. And there's like the two kind of ways of making it work. And it seems like now you're looking at less geographical, but more fundamentals. Is that shifted for you? Yeah.
Once you kind of break that, it's like a mental barrier of, like, once you break the mental barrier of, like, space from where you are from your property, that becomes less of a barrier. And when my first couple of properties, even when, the first one, I did pretty much everything wrong in the book. And a lot of the problems that came from that, none of them were because of the geographic barrier. So once that barrier was broken, it was like, okay, now it's fundamentals of the city. It's fundamentals of the team you have in place. And like I said, the communication and especially with the last 2 years, like how easy it is, like, to do this, to do Zoom or FaceTime walkthroughs of properties. It's the excuses are becoming less and less to only invest in your backyard if your backyard doesn't make sense for your goals. And for a lot of people, the GTA, the GVA, those areas work fantastically for their goals. It just depends on what your goals are. It is definitely more fundamentals, and there's lots of pieces that go into choosing a city. As long, you just got to make sure you don't do the analysis paralysis thing. So
agreed. I mean, that's as an investor focused realtor, we deal with so many people going through the analysis paralysis, especially first time investors. So what my plan is, let's go down that path. So let's say you find a market, you've understood that market that you're looking at, and you talked about the power team. So like, what's your first step? You know the market now, you figured it out. How are you finding that first member of your power team, and who is that typically?
Usually, okay, so yeah, if I've narrowed down a market, again, picking the market is a whole different subset of conversation. But once you're there and you're looking for the power team, usually what I do is I lean on my network from other various Facebook groups or people I know that invest. I'm like, hey, who do you know? Like, do you know any good? Sorry to go backwards for your question. Usually the first person I'm looking for is an investor focused realtor that comes recommended by investors that I trust. That is probably the most, between that and a mortgage broker, those are the two most important for sure. Because I like leaning on them for a lot of market expertise and building a kind of a relationship and of an understanding, knowing that this is going to be a two-way street relationship. It's going to be a win-win, because if you are a serious investor and looking to invest, a good investor focused realtor will spend the time with you to, help you with comps, help you with learning the city, run things by you, be a trusted source for you. Absolutely vital. The next one you need to look for and go in with is a very good investor focused lawyer, who there, you can look on your guys' power team. I've used them before. There's a, in the Edmonton area, you got to find the ones that are good. 1, 2, 3. And then the last piece, and this one comes to be the most important once you have properties, is a very good vetted property manager. Being out of province means that it is not viable, and in my opinion, very, very ill-advised to try and self-manage your own properties if you are not in the area. You have to. It's a line item. It is something that is kind of non-negotiable in my mind, is having either property management or having a JV on the ground JV is joint venture. If anyone doesn't know that, having someone that is taking care of it that you trust. But those four are the key. And you read any books, anything online, any podcast, those are the four that will come up.
100%. And I think, you definitely nailed it on the head. And we at the Mogul team, we do a ton of these interviews, conversations with clients from all over Canada, and they start talking about, they start chatting about building your team. And that's probably one of the most important things. If you ever go to any investor education groups or meetups, that's a lot of things that they talk about, is building that team. So really making sure that you have that team. And the way that I usually talk about it is being that quarterback for a lot of people, because if you're new to that market, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but for you, what was, the biggest barrier to enter that new market? Is it finding that right key person who's going to help make those introductions to you for that power team? Or for you, like, what would be the biggest barrier into the market for you?
Yeah, it's definitely finding that right person and finding one that you can trust. But I guess getting a bit more meta on that one is it's fear. Especially for me, it was like the fear of being like, I'm in Vancouver and this property is not in Vancouver. And for a lot of people that aren't in this real estate world or anything like that, they're going to look at you like you're crazy, being like, what, you mean your property is like there's Rockies in the way, man. I'm like, yeah, I know, but I have a team I trust, and I have, so I would say that oh gosh, I forget your original question. But yeah, no, from a like a mindset perspective, fear for sure. It's amplified by the fact that you can't live, breathe, and see it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that's fear is probably one of the biggest things we deal with, and it's it's obviously an emotional thing that we get triggered by. So it's how do we get past that, right? So let's say that we have the market that we found, and you found an agent, or you're going through that process of interviewing agents. What are some of the questions for yourself now that you're an experienced investor? You're going to a brand new market. How are you vetting that realtor to make sure they're finding you the right investment properties?
I think one of the big keys is just ensuring that they understand kind of your goals. I like to know if they are active investors themselves. That's big for me, because if there's a very big difference in kind of your, I guess, a residential realtor that's selling houses to first-time home buyers, and an investor-focused realtor that understands numbers, understands comps, understands the market. That's big for me. I like to know, I also like to get asked for references, that kind of stuff. Do you have any other investors that you work with? Or I ask them, what do you use for property management? And then I'll, you kind of build this kind of spider web of different people that refer different people, and see whose names keep popping up. I find that helpful. And then I just get into kind of asking, I guess I ask a lot of hypotheticals of being, if we were to keep going with this, how would this look, on property 1, property 2? And then I'm just trying to think of other things I would ask them. I guess I would also kind of run by my goals and plans, and make sure that they understand this is not just I'm going to buy one house and scram kind of relationship I'm trying to build. I'm trying to build we're trying to build a business relationship here that could, last for multiple transactions. Of
course. Yeah, I think that's key. And I love the fact that you're building that spider web, and you're seeing if that name keeps popping up. And I remember when I worked with James, before I was an investor myself, before I was a realtor and I was an investor, some of the things that really just wowed me about James, for example, was I kept asking what are the rental amounts for this area? Another great questions are, what sort of tenant profile here? What do they do for work? You need to understand that market, and you need to understand the tenant profile, the rents for those locations. So I find when you're vetting an agent, asking about those questions, but really about talking about your goals. You keep going back to understanding what your goals are and being able to go through that. So yeah, it's really impactful. So let's say you got your market, you found your agent. Now you're getting into it. There's kind of there's two ways of thinking about it that I find that a lot of investors approach cities and markets outside of what their typical geographical area would suggest. They would be, let's go to the market, let's learn as much as we can, we'll do a city tour, and then when the right property comes up, I'm going to pull the trigger on it. Or they're going to search and look, do everything virtual, and then they're going to come to the city. For you, what was kind of the strategy right from the beginning? And have you changed it from where you're at today versus what you did in the past?
Initially, when I started investing, it was pre-COVID, so it was a very different world. But I was very green when I started, so I still felt I needed to, get there and know it, see it, feel it, walk it, slip in the snow, know what it would actually be like, that kind of stuff. And then, like everybody in the world, March 2020, we were forced to shift gears. We were forced to change. And I had already started to shift in that way of, I'd make sure you build that power team. You have calls like this. if you go out and meet them, you do that if you have to. But you can accomplish a fairly significant portion of what you need to virtually and via phone, especially in the last two years. I've bought, that's not a word. I've bought a few property, I think 2 or 3 now, where I've seen some pictures done on walkthrough and be like, let's go, let's close. But that comes with a lot of trust in the team you have. Again, I sound like a broken record. I do realize that, but it's because of how important it is to have that team you trust. But yeah, I think at this point now we're much more comfortable doing it from getting a few ducks in the row, but then we can go virtual and do what we need to do. So
when you have that, how are you finding those properties? Are you typically relying on the agent, or are you screwing realtor.ca yourself? How much are you doing yourself versus relying on that team?
Oh, I lean heavily on my team. I lean heavily on joint venture partners that I have locally as well. I partner a lot with my properties, so that I have someone on the ground. I guess that's a huge piece that I should have brought up initially is having joint ventures in the cities that you're in, and relying on them. Realtors, I haven't done much realtor.ca on my own because I'm on those drip feeds that come in from realtors, wholesalers, Facebook groups, Canada Wholesale Facebook group. I just essentially you just communicate with everybody and just kind of blurt it out there and let everyone know, and you never know where a deal is going to come from.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you never know. And I love getting a little bit creative. And I think that's where, when you have an investor focused realtor, I mean, they're screwing at every part of the market. They're looking at MLS, they're looking off market, they're looking at, the wholesale page, they have relationships with wholesalers, all those sort of things kind of come into effect. So say you find that deal, and now you wrote a contract on it, you got it pending. Mm-hmm. This is kind of where everything becomes a little bit more real. You're putting some money on the line, you're getting it under contract. Now you're paying for some due diligence. You got your financing, your bank appraisal, and then your home inspection. Are you relying a lot on the agent and the home inspector to give you the rundown of the property, or are you typically flying out for the inspection? Walk me through the process of how you're kind of going about the transaction when you get to that point.
Yeah, sure. I've kind of run the whole gamut on that, where I've done some where I've relied heavily on a joint venture partner or the investor focused realtor, the inspector, a contractor that I've had we're working with on the property. And there's been others where I've flown out and I have personally taken to go down the drain and shoved it down the drain to just see what we got going on in there. Because I told the inspector on the last property, something bad happened and I want to know for sure. The sewer scope. I'm like, the last property I had, we had something real bad happen. So I'm going to put the sewer scope down here. So I've gone the whole gamut. And the one thing that, oh yeah. And I put it down and I'm like, I'm not bringing that back up. that's you now. At least I know that it's there and I can see that it's right into the city line. So anyways, digression, sorry. I've run the whole gamut, but a lot of, again, broken record, but it's having the people you trust and relying on them in that symbiotic relationship. But going back, the thing that is so great for Edmonton from Vancouver is that it's such a quick and easy flight from YVR or from Abbotsford. You got Swoop, you got Flair, WestJet, Air Canada. I've flown in and out the same day for under $80 return, all in. Wow. Like if you do that from Abbotsford with $8 parking, it's cheaper than gas to get to Kelowna and back. So it's really less. It's less of a barrier than people think if they just think a little bit outside the box, I guess. Yeah. So this is one of the things that you touched on and you kind of emphasized it a lot was the property management. And I think that buying a property and talking about your door count, that's the sexy part about real estate. But nobody really thinks property management is that sexy. So the non-sexy part is the property management
So let's talk a little bit about the property management. How do you find these property managers, and are you even looking at doing management yourself from out of province, or would you not even touch it?
I wouldn't even. Me personally, no. At the absolute bare minimum, in my opinion, you should be having someone help place tenants for you. When we started, again, Green did pretty much everything wrong. We had property management that we didn't properly vet. They put some really poor people in a brand new property, and it was hell for 6-8 months. And I was here, and I didn't know what to do. I ended up relying on my contractor to go there and essentially give these people cash to leave. And they lived. What did he say? They lived 5 years in this property in 5 months. So I learned quickly that you hire slowly and fire fast with property management. And I didn't vet well enough. And I learned that lesson very expensively. Yeah. So the property management, although it's not sexy, they're taking care of your business, because each property is a business, and they are the ones that are the day-to-day taking care of your business. And the 8 to 10% you're going to pay them when nothing is going wrong, you're going to be like, well, I could do this. Now, why am I paying them 8 to 10%? But then when stuff, and I should caveat that with saying the reason stuff isn't going on is because you probably have a pretty good property manager, and that's why you're paying them. So it's not sexy, but trust me, and many others that have worse stories of tenants, that they're vital, and getting the right ones are vital. And they know, again, your guys' power team and taking recommendations from other investors. I sound like a real broken record just because you figure out what works, and there's a reason why it's a broken record, is because it's crucial. And I learned the hard way that if you think you're smarter than what everyone's telling you, you're going to learn very quickly. You're going to get burned. So,
and I think there's definitely two types of property managers as well, and there's property managers who are in it because they think it's a business that they're going to make a lot of money at, and they're just planning to get more doors and more doors so that they can get more of that management fee. And then there's other ones who they started as owners themselves. They've been able to build up their own portfolio. They're like, hey, we kind of have a recipe for this, and I think I can help other, investors build their portfolios with it. And that's, with Tyler at Libertas, their company, that's exactly how they got started. And so I think that, it's super important to kind of learn through that and figure out exactly, like, vetting your property manager and asking them questions and interviewing them. It's almost one of the most important ways of making sure that we go through that process for sure. So you mentioned that you learned the hard way. Maybe just expand on that a little bit. And we're getting almost at time here. So,
yeah.
Just give us the Cold Notes version of what happened there.
I was going to say, if you want the full story, a few people here have heard it. I'm like, that's a 1 or 2 or 3 beer story. So essentially, we did a lot of things that what I just said, kind of just flip that on its head and do the polar opposite. For our first property, I was eager, I was ready to go. I bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. I'm like, oh my gosh, look at these prices here. This you can't lose compared to what you see in Vancouver. And we bit off a lot more than we could chew. We bought a property that it was a very complex deal, off market. It was essentially a failed infill that wasn't at complete. Wasn't at completion, so it was still technically, according to the city, just a hole in the ground. A lot of issues. The person we bought it from, we didn't do our due diligence. They didn't give us time to do due diligence. We ran into a lot of hiccups, and trying to manage this from out of province with my partners who are also out of province, it was very, very trying for all of us. It was, and it became very expensive. When you're doing things where there was clear latent defects that we weren't told of. and we didn't have the right, we didn't have the right teams in place, and essentially, long story short, a 4-month touch-up project of a couple of basements turned into a 14-month, pretty much full gut on hard money. It was way more than I really would have ever anticipated. But I've presented on this property before, and when I added everything up, and all the different costs and all the extra hard money we had to hold on to, I was borrowing money from, I was credit cards, everything. It was severely affecting my mental health. I'm not afraid to admit that anymore. It was terrible. Like I was getting, pretty, like my anxiety was getting out of control almost. But after tallying everything up, I had to give it a few months before I could do that. I couldn't even look at the numbers because I would just be like, I'd shut the computer. Nope, can't do it. And then after I added it all up from where we refinanced, it essentially was how much we had into the property. So was
it a break even?
It was essentially a break even, like plus or minus maybe $5,000 or $10,000. So like zooming out 10,000 feet after all like that stuff, we were expecting 100% BRRRR plus a bit of a cash out. After all the stuff we did wrong, it wasn't like it was going to bankrupt us. So having that perspective now has I'm hoping has turned me into a bit more of a resilient investor, as well as my partners. Going through that was tough, and it was trying for all of us, and it's kind of hardened our resolve a little bit. And the things that are so great about the age we live in and the technological age we live in is that there's so like pretty much if there was something that you said could have gone wrong, I'm like, well, that happened, but a little bit worse on mine. But with all the technology that we have, you're able to manage through it, leaning on some very key relationships, but ended up going through to a break-even property. So I'm like, heck, if we can get through that, then we can get through anything. And then, of course, the next property we buy 2 days before the world shuts down for COVID. So it was like, okay, here we go again. But we got through that one. It's you find a way and you persevere. And
100%.
Whether you do that in town or as an out of province investor, the differences are not as pronounced as most would think.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate so much of your knowledge, and thank you for letting us put you on the spotlight. I know that you are, a very experienced investor who's gone through the trials and tribulations of most investors that do, but I appreciate you coming on stage and